Where does the energy come from at the beginning of the film? Screams. Where does the energy come from at the end of the film? Laughter. So you've just had this kind of tectonic shift from one form to another. Fear has been replaced by joy.
Welcome to Popcorn Parenting, the podcast about movies, mythology, and the Messiah, or in the case of today's episode, world building, wickedness, and Wazowski. And if you're intrigued by that, you should be. It's going to be explained by our resident reformed mythologist, Nate Morgan Locke. Hello, Nate.
You didn't do the voice. You're supposed to say Wazowski, like
Wazowski. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, as you can already tell, and from the title of the podcast, there are no surprises here. We're talking about the marvellous Monsters, Inc. And full disclosure, I watched this again a few weeks ago with my kids, and I just thought it was terrific. I thought it was really good, and I thought, and I turned to my kids to discuss it with them, and I had nothing other than we all just said, "That's really good, isn't it? It's a really good movie." Yeah. It's kind of about being scared. My kids are slightly older than that now, although actually they do scare. One of them scares a bit. Shall I just do some cold hard facts and then we can stop waggling on the tea?
Dive in.
We're talking about Monsters, Inc., the 2001 Pixar movie, which was written by Andrew Stanton and Dan Gerson, who has sadly died at the age of 49. So he wasn't able to add much to his canon of excellent work beyond Monsters, Inc., Monsters University, which we're not really going to get into. And he was working on Cars 3 when he sadly passed away. Bit of a downer. Story by Pete Docter, among others, and starring the vocal stylings of John Goodman, Billy Crystal, bit of a favourite of mine, Steve Buscemi, who is a favourite of many others, James Coburn, Jennifer Tilly, and Mary Gibbs. Music by Randy Newman. It cost $115 million. It took the best part of $600 million, and I suspect it's gonna take that again, isn't it? Because it's just an evergreen classic. So why don't you just give us a quick inner world, and we'll get into our first W.
Okay, so in a world through a wardrobe, inhabited by monsters, two friends and work colleagues, James P. Sullivan and Mike Wazowski, are on the verge of breaking the all-time scare record. However, in the background to this, there is an energy crisis because children are harder to scare these days. And so some kind of radical solution is needed. In amongst the film, Boo enters into the monsters' world and radically changes Sully and Mike, and there's a sort of reformation that takes place in the whole of Monstropolis. And the aim of the game, I suppose, is to get Boo back into her bedroom, and they manage to successfully do that and defeat the baddies in the process. So it's a really fun, really kind of funny, great family film, I think.
Sort of the opposite of Soul, really. As I was watching it recently, I was just thinking, wow, this movie absolutely ties up. And I know I go on about how Toy Story 2 is perfect. Yeah. And I was surprised by Wall-E going back to that and discovering, wow, this movie is way better than I remember. I thought it was good and it was amazing. With Monsters, Inc., I just thought, wow, they've really, really chiseled this plot. And it's completely, it's flawless. Absolutely flawless.
It's so tight. There's no fat on it. And I mean, that for our first kind of world building, it's one of the things that staggered me watching it again recently was the extent to which they've thought about not just how do you have some characters in a sort of setting, but they've actually thought about how is Monstropolis structured, both kind of sociologically and economically, right? It's like, so you've got all the obvious jokes about, do you want some odorant? And, here's some wet dog, and that sort of spraying that off. And then they pour their sludgy kind of coffee out. But what I think is most remarkable is the way that they've thought, well, how do you make a film for kids about a power station? Effectively, that's what this is, because, of course, the power, the energy to run the city of Monstropolis is drawn from the screams of children.
And trying to square the circle of, we want to do a fun family movie about the thing that kids are most scared of, which is monsters under their bed at night or coming out of the cupboard.
Yeah.
And they managed to not do that.
The thing with this, I suppose, is that as long as you don't push too far into the sort of energy economics of Monstropolis at the beginning, you can believe that Mike and Sully are good guys. Right? As long as if you don't think too hard about the fact that this guy's job is to torment and terrify children, to give people nightmares.
Even at the start of the movie, you kind of want to hug the big scary monster.
Yeah, and that's partly because of his design and the way that they've drawn him and Mike. But one of I think it's the opening scene with the child going off to sleep, and then this kind of silhouette comes into their bedroom, and you see these eyes underneath the bed, and it's all kind of terrifying and loads of jeopardy. And then when the child wakes up and screams, this monster falls over and lands on some football or something. So you think, oh, okay, so we're playing this for laughs, okay? And then you realize it's a simulation. And even that is remarkable, right? Think about world building. Not only have you got to have the administrative wing, like the receptionist, all these scarers, the history of the corporation, right?
Yeah.
Which has to be the legacy of the Waternoose family. You need to train up new scarers through the use of a simulator in which they can sort of watch their stuff later on, which then plays into the whole reveal at the end of the film.
Yeah.
I'll scare 1,000 children. I'll kidnap 1,000 children if it means I get my company back or whatever. We wouldn't have a popcorn parenting podcast if we thought that you just watch a movie and you just completely leave it at that and don't think about it anymore. I think if you do think about the energy economics of Monstropolis, I think that gives you a really easy way into a good conversation. So a question you can ask at the beginning is, where does the energy come from at the beginning of the film? Mm-hmm. Screams. Where does the energy come from at the end of the film? Laughter. So you've just had this kind of tectonic shift from one form to another. Fear has been replaced by joy. Or as you could put it in sort of, biblical categories. If you think of 1 John 4, perfect love drives out fear. So on a macro level, the whole film is about this reformation that takes place as Boo enters into this world.
Yeah.
Boo's time in Monstropolis is a kind of complete, is a sea change in what's happening in the world. So you could almost say, well, the history of Monstropolis is you've got the time before Boo, right? And then the time after Boo. And somehow she was able to do something which changed the world.
That's interesting because, having talked about the Lego movie, you've got someone who comes in who is an innocent.
Yeah.
And rather than being an innocent adult like Jesus, we've got essentially an innocent baby.
Yeah.
Who is in Boo, she just walks in to their worthis just changes everything. Yeah. I mean, what more nativity do you want?
So this is a bit of a poor critique of or a cheap critique of Monsters Inc. It doesn't get to the cross, right?
No.
But the fact that Boo enters the world and is able to radically alter it by her just impact is pretty remarkable.
Yeah. So we've talked about world building. Are we now on wickedness?
Yeah, I think so. This, in a way, overlaps quite a lot with what we did in the episode on How to Train Your Dragon.
Ah, yeah.
So when we thought about How to Train Your Dragon, we said, if you can train it, is it really a dragon? Have you so reinterpreted the symbol of evil and wickedness that you've actually gutted it, right? It has no kind of value to it anymore. And so the monsters of Monsters Inc. are, on the whole, not very monstrous. Right? They're cuddly and they're funny and they're cheerful and they're friendly. And as we'll see with Sully, they become very sort of paternal and caring. And you think, this isn't really a monster. Now, as we said before in the How to Train Your Dragon episode, there are so many children's films which try to sort of reinterpret the symbols of evil. And the baddie, seeing things from the baddie's point of view. Gru in Despicable Me. You've got Wreck-It Ralph as the bad guy in his computer game, who actually becomes the hero in that one. You had it with Wicked when they did a retelling of The Wizard of Oz from the perspective of the Witch of the West. Is that who she is? I've never seen Wicked. Anyway, Cruella. They're about to do a remake or a sort of slanted view on 101 Dalmatians. And so this presents, I think, a genuine challenge for parents to think, how do we talk to our children about wickedness and evil if every time we put on a movie, the traditional symbols of what is evil have been flipped over and, oh, okay, dragons are good. They're really good.
Yeah.
And monsters.
And it's always the
good.
problem is us. The problem
Yeah.
is the hate and the prejudice that we have.
Yeah.
And and dragons just need to be educated. Basically, anyone who does anything that's antisocial or what we would say evil, they need to be helped.
Yeah.
So they're never. Which, in one sense, you would say, well, that's entirely Christian, because although we are, we believe in total depravity. We do also know that we need salvation, and that through salvation we can receive the Holy Spirit and begin to become more like Christ. We are the bad guys, but equally to say the bad guys are just good guys, really, it's like, no, not quite.
It's part of this thing of saying that the only thing that really exists is the human and the material, right? And because there's nothing outside of our personal experiences and there's nothing beyond human explanations. There is no demonic realm, right? There is no devil, right? There's no such thing as evil spirits, really. This is all just kind of, clumsy explanations for social phenomenon. And you think, well, if your view of the world is that, then you'll think, well, we'll just have a very pragmatic approach to everything, which is to say education, right? It's all just about telling people the truth and training them to be better. And therefore we go with confidence into the face of apparent evil and we say to it, come, let's reason together and let me talk you out of it. And we don't realize that as human beings, we are in a spiritual war, buffeted on every side by genuine evil, and have an enemy who will use every trick that he knows to deny the truth and to keep us living lives of delusion. And I think without an appreciation for that, we do just have, well, maybe they're just misunderstood.
Yeah.
Maybe everyone's just misunderstood.
Having said all that, there is a proper baddie. There are two proper baddies. So in a way, it looks like the baddies are actually goodies. But there's a proper baddie, and then there's a goodie who turns out to be a baddie.
Yeah.
So it's, and then there's a baddie who turns out to be a goodie, which is the...
Yeah, that's the thing, is that you can't actually make a morally relativistic film with any coherence, right? There's no poetic justice because, it's just a matter of interpretation and everyone's just sort of getting on. You have to be grounded on something substantial, which is why Randall, very interestingly, is a sort of ticks all the boxes of a kind of demonic character, of a true monster, right? So he's reptilian. He's kind of got this chameleon ability to become invisible, right? And shape-shifting is a sort, the devil can disguise himself as an angel of light, right? This ability to kind of deceive and sneak around. That's precisely what you'd expect from a genuine baddie. Yeah. And what's his solution, right? What's the solution to the energy crisis? Is, oh no, we don't enter into, we don't have ethical screams, right? Where we just go into children's bedrooms, we scare them, and then we come out again. No, what we're going to do is we're going to go into the children's bedroom, kidnap the children, and then keep them alive, harvesting their scream. This is the most terrifying.
Yeah.
Oh my! Don't think about this too much, kids.
Well, no, but in a way, you do think about it, but it's okay. You buy it, and I think this is a really good example. I've not really thought of this much before, but people often say, I wrote a book called The Sacred Art of Joking, and it's all about how jokes work and offend people, and how they go wrong. And people often in all the press and the media for that, people just say to me, "Is there anything that you can't joke about?" And my answer is usually, you would think so, but actually the skill of the artist is to take you somewhere where you did not think you could go. Pixar have done a terrific job here, and consistently with one or two clunkers, where they really do sort of make it okay.
And in a way, I suppose the fact that it's a sort of industrial level film, when you think about it, it's about this factory, and therefore the whole system with these doors and why we need to speak to our friend Barry Cooper about why Disney haven't built the Monsters Inc. ride yet, because who wouldn't want to go through those cavernous places of doors, stepping into Japan and Paris and all this sort of stuff, and you think, guys, this is literally right here, why haven't you done this yet? But because that's all set up for us, because there's a kind of plausibility structure around the way that this system's taking place, and we've accepted that already, and we've gone, it's not that bad, right? Then when we get to Randall's plot with the Scream Extractor, we sort of just go, it's just a more efficient version of it. Yeah, it's just, we're just still using screams, but we don't like it because the characters in the film don't like it. And they've started to change their minds about children, right? Yeah. So Sully's sort of gone, do you know what? I'm not sure she's dangerous. And so he's come round to a different way of thinking by spending time with Boo. His paternal protective instinct kicks in, and now he starts to think about that whole thing very differently.
I think what it also shows us, I don't know if it's a potential for a conversation, is how a society can be okay with something which they then think, that's not okay at all. There are obvious examples of this, but one that's actually more relevant to Monsters Inc. is we used to be fine with child labour in the West. And, the Victorians eventually put an end to that. and it seemed to be a monstrous thing looking back. Why on earth would you do that? But actually, at the time, didn't seem unreasonable, and plenty of children died in mills and in mines, and they were treated like adults in that sense, but they weren't paid as well. And so the moment you saw someone just says, "Hang on, is this all right?" Everyone slightly goes, "Oh, I'm not sure it is."
Yeah.
So the moment there's that glimmer of actually this is not cool, everything kind of has to change, and it's only a matter of time normally, isn't it? And obviously, in cartoon world, in that world, it flips very, very quickly. But also because it's very convenient that the laughter is worth a lot more than a scream.
It is very
but in a way, that's
10
kind of a
times more powerful. Yeah.
But in a way, you could argue that is a completely theologically justifiable point, isn't it? We've done wickedness now. Is that number 2?
Yep.
And so now we're on to Wazowski.
Sorry,
Wazowski.
I'm watching you, Wazowski. Always watching. Yeah, so this is really just about the characters themselves. So Mike and Sully as friends, which, if you stop and think about it, is a really odd children's movie in the last 30 years setup, right? You have 2 adult men are the main characters, and well, they're not gay. They're not, in any sort of. There's no sort of suggestion that Mike is trying to date Celia, right? And they just have this friendship, right? This adult male friendship, which is the crucial relationship in the movie, right? That's the thing which at the climax of the film, or the great tension of the film, is broken when they're in the welcome to the Himalayas, right? And they have this big argument, and they've fallen out because of the way that Mike is trying to get rid of Boo and get her back to her bedroom quickly, and then Sully is kind of feeling protective of her, and so they've fallen out. And we know, as the audience, we're like, that's the biggest drama in this, right? That these 2 friends could become enemies. And obviously, by the end of the film, they've resolved, and they're back on good terms, and they work together to solve the problem. So it's just, I found that really interesting as a kind of structural situation, that your characters are these 2, are in these demographics, and that the thing you're protecting is a friendship, which seems odd in, kind of a lot of recent Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks stuff. The friendship between 2 guys is your crucial element. And then you get the song Wouldn't Have Nothing If I Didn't Have You, which just the recording of that, John Goodman and Billy Crystal singing that together, is amazing. I think that was interesting. But then the change that takes place with Boo and Sully is a really odd one, like the fact that Mike and Sully's relationship is the key dynamic. Because Sully, who's this terrifying monster, but he's a nice guy, right? Because he's friends with Mike, and he's funny and all that sort of stuff. He starts to become protective of Boo, and starts to have to take on very basic parenting responsibilities, right? He's looking after an infant, right? What does she need? She needs to go to sleep. She needs to go to the bathroom at one point. They play hide and seek. And you've got all these really just simple roles that a father has to kind of perform, where you feel totally what are you doing? When they're all dressed up trying to deal with the baby, right? And they've Mike's using oven gloves and all that sort of stuff, right? And they're kind of protected. Yeah. And you think there's something about the changing of the first nappy, right? Or diaper for any American listeners. So you've got this thing of, what do I do with this thing? I'm a guy, but I don't feel prepared for this. But then I sort of grow into this paternal role. and it starts to sort of, I feel like I'm being sort of filled out as a person in a way. And I think that's what's so great about Sully's character, such that, very end of the film when Mike manages to collect all the pieces of Boo's door, and Sully can put the final piece into the door and open it, and then the final shot is just him looking through from the wardrobe, and you just think, oh, there we go. So with this season, we talked a bit more about parenting, particularly, and I think Sully as a first time dad, kind of thing, or having this responsibility, is a really interesting one.
Yeah, and he just doesn't want it. He can tell he just doesn't want the responsibility as well. He's not just terrified, he's terrified about what it means. And he doesn't want to form a bond with it. It's like you don't want to name if you've got a pet pig and you're going to eat it, you don't give it a name.
Well, that's what they say. That's what Mike says. You called him, he's called Boo. It's like, you don't name it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it is an incredibly funny thing, especially for kids, that you've got monsters confronted with an actual kid and they're terrified.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that whilst we're here, I think it's refreshing because, people listen to this, they probably have kids and they probably do have nightmares and they probably do see monsters. I don't know if yours have gone through it. One of mine never really did. The other one has and still does sometimes. And I guess the thing from a biblical perspective, and you may have other stuff on this, but is to say to kids, demons are real. What happens though when Jesus meets demons? How does that go? Is there any kind of a contest? What do? They scream. They scream for pity. They scream for mercy. They scream. They run. They've got nothing.
Yeah.
They've got absolutely nothing. And so, in a way, I just think, we've got something to offer. And I think being a Christian's pretty hard. Being a Christian parent is really hard. Being a Christian kid's really hard. But the one thing that we've got here in this situation is a saviour who has defeated not just evil but demons.
Yeah.
And so we actually can talk about this and just say, and then we can actually read in the New Testament, we can read a gospel and just go, Matthew, Mark or Luke, no demons in John. So have a look through, I don't know which would be the best to do, but just go, look, this must have been genuinely frightening for the people at the time. And Jesus isn't worried. It's kind of a bit embarrassingly one-sided, really.
Yeah.
I would be. I think you could have that conversation off the back of this, and I guess that we didn't have that conversation on the back of this because I've already had that conversation. With my kids.
I totally agree. I think if we take the theme of fear, I mean, it's massive in Scripture to look at fear and how does, if the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and yet over and over and over again in the Bible, it's do not be afraid. Right, so angels, this first thing they always say is like, don't be afraid. I'll just get that out of the way. First thing you should always say, because we would be terrified. And there's something about Boo's relationship with Sully in which she doesn't need to be afraid because she's with him. So there's actually that really interesting scene when towards the end of the film, Sully uses the simulator and does all this terrifying stuff to the model child, and then Boo just starts screaming and crying, and then Sully sees himself on the monitors to say, "Oh my goodness, I've just totally terrified this child," and there's a sense in which that is that's the proper response to God's glory. Is to say he is awesome, awful, or he's full of awe, okay? And yet the best thing to do is to run into his arms. I think we absolutely miss a trick when we just say, oh, don't worry about that. There's nothing there. You don't need to worry. And it's like, yes, there's nothing there, but even if there was, we know the Good Shepherd.
Yeah.
And we walk with him. we're safe in.
And I think what we then do is we functionally say the spiritual world isn't real. If we say you don't need to be worried about monsters, we don't need to say there are monsters necessarily, but we can be honest about there are things to be scared of. And let's look at let's look at scary things in the Bible and see how it goes. And if you're in Christ, then they're going to run. And so, I think if this movie just opens up that conversation, I think it's one well worth having. And that, who are we going to run to? I think is the question. And actually, if they're older, you can have that conversation about. It's interesting who also people are afraid of in the Bible. It's God. Are we actually afraid of God? Are we afraid of the wrong thing?
Yeah.
Because angels turn up and they say, "Don't be afraid," because our natural response to an angel, to that kind of perfection, is on your knees, face down. Don't look at me. And actually, the wonderful thing is that we, through Christ, have been made worthy. So yeah, cool. Well, I think that's probably enough Monsters Inc. to be going on with. I note that from the 2nd of July of 2021, Monsters at Work is an upcoming streaming series on the Disney Plus platform. And it looks like John Goodman and Billy Crystal are reprising their roles as Sully and Wazowski. And looks like Ratzenberger's in it as well, the voice of the Yeti. And Jennifer Tilly, the one-eyed snake-haired girlfriend. And various others. Henry Winkler's going to be in it as Tyler's friendly boss. He'll basically be the Fonz, won't he?
Might be.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see how that central relationship and friendship plays out in that series. All I can say is I hope it's better than the abominable Snoopy in Space series, which was really, really boring. But we should talk about Charlie Brown.
We should. I think Charlie Brown, the Peanuts movie, was quite an interesting one, especially because we did the Christmas special, didn't we? So.
Yeah, maybe we've already done it. So yeah, thanks very much, Nate.
Thank you, James.
Speak to you next time. Cheerio.